The diplomatic deception. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the viewport of the diplomatic vessel Terra's Hope, watching the massive crystalline structure of the Galactic Hegemony's Central Assembly grow larger against the backdrop of swirling nebula. Her reflection showed a composed woman in her 50s, wearing the sleek black uniform of the Earth Diplomatic Corps, adorned with a single silver pin shaped like an olive branch, the universal symbol of peace. The irony wasn't lost on her. Final approach vector confirmed. Ambassador, Captain Rodriguez announced from his station. The hegemony's defense grid is scanning us. Everything appears nominal. Sarah nodded, maintaining her serene expression even as her mind raced through the countless scenarios they had wargamed. The hegemony scanners would find exactly what they expected. A lightly armed diplomatic vessel carrying Earth's representatives to discuss their species' integration into the galaxy's ruling body. They wouldn't detect the quantum-encrypted communications array hidden within the ship's crystalline hull, nor the advanced shield harmonics disguised as standard civilian protection systems. "Time to put on our best behavior," she said, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her uniform. "Remember, we're the primitive newcomers, eager to learn from our betters." Her small team of 5 responded with subtle nods. Each had been chosen not just for their diplomatic skills, but for their ability to maintain the facade of humanity's technological inferiority. It had taken decades of careful planning to reach this point, ever since first contact revealed the true nature of galactic politics. The hegemony, a coalition of 17 spacefaring species, maintained their power through technological superiority and carefully controlled advancement of lesser races. They had expected Earth to follow the usual pattern, grateful acceptance of their guidance, followed by centuries of carefully managed development under their watchful eye. Instead, humanity had smiled, bowed, and begun preparing for war. The docking procedure went smoothly, their ship guided into one of the assembly's numerous diplomatic berths by tractor beams that their sensors pretended were far more advanced than Earth's technology. Sarah led her team through the airlock, where they were met by their official escort, a towering Archean named Superior Delegate Vex Thor, his iridescent scales shifting in patterns that their cultural databases identified as expressing polite condescension. "Welcome to the assembly of civilized species," Vex Thor's translator rendered his clicking speech into standard galactic. "We trust your journey through our protected spaces was illuminating." Sarah bowed exactly 12 degrees, the proper amount for a species seeking admission to the hegemony. "Most illuminating, Superior Delegate. The efficiency of your patrol networks is particularly impressive to our humble observers." Those patrol networks had been carefully mapped by stealth human probes over the past 5 years, their blind spots and vulnerabilities noted and incorporated into today's plans. But Vex Thor simply bobbed his head in acknowledgement of what he assumed was genuine praise. The delegation was led through vast halls of crystalline architecture, past representatives of dozens of species. Some were full members of the hegemony, marked by their ornate regalia and confident bearing. Others were client races, their simpler attire and deferential manner marking them as dependent on the hegemony's good graces. Sarah noted how the various species arranged themselves in the complex hierarchy that the hegemony had crafted over millennia, a hierarchy that humanity had no intention of joining. Their destination was the lesser assembly chamber, where new species were traditionally inducted into the hegemony's sphere of influence. The chamber's design was meant to impress and intimidate, a vast dome of seemingly impossible architecture, with the hegemony council seated on elevated platforms, while petitioning races stood at floor level. Sarah took her position at the speaker's podium, her team arraying themselves behind her in a carefully choreographed display of deference. Above them, the 17 members of the Hegemony Council gazed down with varying degrees of interest and disdain. High Chancellor Ixel of the Archeans spoke first, his translator rendering his words with appropriate gravitas. "Representatives of Earth, you stand before the assembled wisdom of the galaxy's eldest civilizations. We have watched your development since your first tentative steps into space. We have protected you from the dangers you could not yet comprehend. Now, you seek to join our grand coalition of species. Sarah bowed again, noting the subtle shifts in her quantum communicator that indicated everything was proceeding according to schedule. Your generosity humbles us, High Chancellor. Humanity recognizes the wisdom of accepting guidance from those who have traveled the stars for eons before us. The High Chancellor's scales rippled with satisfaction. Your wisdom in accepting your place does you credit. There will, of course, be certain requirements. The sharing of your military technology, for instance, and the placement of hegemony advisors in key positions of your government. If I may, High Chancellor, Sarah kept her voice appropriately hesitant. Might we discuss the specific details of these requirements? My government has authorized me to negotiate certain points. The next hour was spent in careful diplomatic dance, with Sarah appearing to gradually accept most of the hegemony's demands, while raising minor objections to maintain the appearance of genuine negotiation. All the while, her quantum communicator continued its silent countdown. When the designated moment arrived, Sarah was deep in discussion about trade tariffs with a Proxian representative. She allowed herself a small smile as her communicator gave the signal. High Chancellor Ixel was the first to notice something was wrong. His scales shifted to alarm patterns as reports began flooding in from the outer defense networks. Sarah watched with carefully hidden satisfaction as the hegemony's leadership realized that their carefully maintained military superiority had been compromised. What is the meaning of this? Ixel's translator couldn't quite capture the mix of fury and fear in his voice as tactical displays showed human warships appearing throughout hegemony space, their advanced stealth systems finally revealing vessels that had been in position for months. Sarah straightened, dropping the deferential posture she had maintained throughout the meeting. High Chancellor, honored members of the Council, humanity thanks you for your offer of guidance. However, we believe we have progressed beyond the need for such supervision. The chamber erupted in chaos as reports continued to arrive. Strategic shipyards, defense platforms, and command centers throughout hegemony space were being neutralized with surgical precision. Not destroyed. Humanity had no desire for wholesale slaughter, but disabled by weapons and tactics the hegemony had never seen before. Impossible, one of the council members shrieked. Your species barely achieved faster than light travel a century ago. A century is a long time when your entire civilization is focused on survival. Sarah replied calmly. We learned from history, you see. Earth's own past showed us what happens to civilizations that encounter technologically superior powers who offer guidance and protection. So we smiled and bowed and prepared. The High Chancellor's scales had shifted to a pattern that the cultural database didn't recognize. You deceived us, he accused. We survived, Sarah corrected. Your hegemony has maintained power through technological superiority and the careful suppression of other species' development. We simply chose not to play by those rules. Her communicator chimed, indicating that the operation's primary objectives had been achieved, right on schedule. The choice before you now is simple, Sarah continued, her voice carrying clearly through the panicked chamber. You can accept a new arrangement, one where humanity joins the hegemony as equals, not subjects, or you can discover exactly how much of your military infrastructure we can disable before you force us to start destroying it instead. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah watched as the reality of their situation sank in for the hegemony's leadership. Their entire power structure had been built on the assumption of overwhelming technological superiority. Without that, they were facing something they had never encountered before, a species that had outmaneuvered them at their own game. You're proposing equal status. Ixel's translator rendered his words carefully. Unprecedented. Many things about today are unprecedented, High Chancellor. Humanity has no desire to dominate the hegemony or destroy what you've built. We simply refuse to be dominated ourselves. The choice is yours. Adaptation or conflict. As the council members conferred urgently among themselves, Sarah allowed herself a moment of private reflection. The path that had led to this moment had been long and difficult, requiring humanity to set aside its internal differences and work with singular purpose. The deception had been necessary. The hegemony would never have accepted equals willingly. But now came the harder part. They would have to prove that humanity could be better rulers than those they had just outmaneuvered. Pride before the fall. Admiral James Chen watched the tactical display aboard the TSS Hyperion, Earth's most advanced warship, currently cloaked at the edge of hegemony space. The massive holographic projection showed thousands of points of light, each representing a human vessel that had just revealed itself from stealth. Decades of preparation were finally bearing fruit. "Status report," he commanded, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "All battle groups reporting ready." "Admiral," Commander Paddle responded from her station. "Operation Ghost Fleet is proceeding as planned. Hegemony defense networks are showing exactly the response patterns we predicted." James nodded, thinking of his sister Sarah in the assembly chamber. Their parents would have appreciated the irony. Both their children playing crucial roles in humanity's greatest deception. While Sarah maintained the diplomatic facade, James commanded the military operation that would forever change the balance of power in the galaxy. "Tactical analysis of hegemony response," he asked, studying the patterns of movement among the enemy fleet. Lieutenant Rodriguez, their strategic AI interface specialist, spoke up. "The hegemony ships are attempting to form defensive clusters around their major command node, sir. Their response times are suboptimal. They clearly never anticipated a threat of this magnitude within their own territory." The human fleet had spent years infiltrating hegemony space, using advanced quantum stealth technology that the aliens had never even theorized was possible. While the hegemony focused on large, impressive ships and stations to showcase their power, humanity had developed technology that emphasized efficiency and subtlety. "They're still underestimating us," James observed, watching the hegemony forces continue to follow predictable defensive protocols. Even now, they can't quite believe a primitive species could have outmaneuvered them so thoroughly. The tactical display updated, showing new movement among the hegemony fleet. Their capital ships, massive crystalline structures that doubled as mobile command centers, were beginning to power up their main weapon systems. The sight would have been intimidating if James hadn't spent years studying their capabilities. "Sir," Commander Patel called out, "we're detecting power signatures from their primary fleet. They appear to be preparing for a major offensive action." James allowed himself a small smile. "Right on schedule. They're falling back on their standard doctrine. Overwhelming force as a show of power. Lieutenant Rodriguez, initiate Phase 2. Throughout hegemony space, human ships began broadcasting on frequencies that the aliens' sensors couldn't ignore. The message was simple but devastating. Detailed tactical data about the hegemony's own weapons and defenses, proving that humanity had completely compromised their military security. "Hegemony command channels are erupting," Rodriguez reported, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "They're realizing that we know everything about their capabilities, while they know almost nothing about ours." The display showed the hegemony fleet's formation beginning to waver. Their strict military hierarchy, already strained by the surprise of human infiltration, was starting to break down as individual commanders realized the full extent of their vulnerability. "Sir," Patel interrupted, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the assembly. The Hegemony Council is requesting an immediate conference with Fleet Command." James exchanged a look with his senior staff. This was moving faster than even their most optimistic projections had predicted. The hegemony's pride had been their weakness. They had never developed contingency plans for being technologically outmatched because they had never believed it possible. "Put them through to my private chamber," he ordered. "Commander Patel, you have the bridge. Maintain current fleet positions, but do not power up any weapon systems unless directly threatened. Let's show them we can be reasonable." The Admiral's private chamber was sparse, designed for functionality rather than comfort. The holographic projector hummed to life, displaying the images of the Hegemony Council members. Their usual air of superiority had been replaced by barely concealed anxiety. High Chancellor Ixel spoke first, his scales now showing patterns of agitation. Admiral Chen, your demonstration has been noted. Perhaps we can discuss terms before this situation escalates unnecessarily. My sister is already presenting our terms in your assembly chamber, James replied calmly. But I'm happy to reiterate them from a military perspective. The hegemony has two choices. Accept humanity as equals and reform your approach to emerging civilizations, or face the consequences of your past actions. You cannot seriously expect. One of the council members began, but Ixel cut them off with a sharp gesture. What guarantees can you offer? The High Chancellor asked. How do we know this isn't simply a prelude to human dominion? James activated a secondary display, showing tactical readouts of human fleet positions. Notice that we haven't destroyed a single hegemony vessel or installation. We've demonstrated our capabilities while minimizing damage and casualties. That restraint should tell you everything you need to know about our intentions. The council members conferred briefly in their own language, though James's translation software easily decoded their discussion. They were beginning to realize that their options were limited. Their entire society was built on the premise of technological superiority. Without it, their authority over their client races would quickly erode. The hegemony has maintained peace in this galaxy for millennia, Ixel said finally. You would risk destabilizing that peace for your own pride. No, James corrected firmly. We're offering you a chance to evolve, to become something better than conquerors hiding behind technological advantages. Humanity doesn't want to rule the galaxy. We want to help build a galaxy worth living in. A new alert flashed on his display. The hegemony civilian leadership was beginning to respond to the situation, and their reactions were exactly what humanity's sociological models had predicted. The client races were watching carefully, seeing their supposed superiors revealed as vulnerable for the first time. You've started something you can't control, one of the council members warned. The galaxy's power structure was inherently unstable, James interrupted. Built on suppression and fear rather than genuine cooperation. We're offering you a chance to be part of something better. But make no mistake, this change is happening with or without your cooperation. The tactical display updated again, showing more hegemony ships standing down from combat status. Their commanders were making individual decisions now, breaking from the rigid hierarchy that had defined their military for centuries. It was the beginning of the transformation that humanity had spent so long planning. Time is short, James continued. Your client races are watching. Your own military is already adapting to the new reality. The question isn't whether the hegemony will change, but whether its current leadership will be part of that change, or be remembered as those who resisted it. He could see the moment when understanding finally settled over the council members. Their choices were limited, but they still had one chance to salvage their legacy. They could be remembered as the leaders who guided the hegemony into a new era, rather than those who clung to power until it was stripped from them entirely. High Chancellor Ixel's scales shifted to a pattern that James's software translated as resignation tinged with hope. Perhaps, the alien leader said slowly, it is time for the hegemony to demonstrate that we can learn as well as teach. Operation Checkmate. Dr. Maya Patel stood in the central control room of Project Oracle, Earth's most advanced quantum computing facility, watching as streams of data flowed across the holographic displays. The facility, hidden beneath the surface of Europa, had been humanity's greatest secret, the true architect of their victory over the hegemony. Neural network analysis complete, announced the AI interface. Hegemony social response patterns are proceeding within predicted parameters. Probability of successful transition, 78.4%, and rising. Maya allowed herself a small smile. For 15 years, she had led the team that developed the predictive models that made this operation possible. While the hegemony had focused on building bigger ships and more powerful weapons, humanity had invested in understanding the fundamental patterns of civilizational behavior. Dr. Patel, her assistant called out, we're receiving priority data from the diplomatic team. The hegemony's client races are beginning to make their moves. The main display shifted, showing a cascade of diplomatic communications across hegemony space. Just as their models had predicted, the formerly subjugated species were quick to recognize the opportunity presented by this power shift. But rather than descending into chaos, they were following the subtle guidance that humanity had spent years embedding into their communications networks. "Show me the nexus points," Maya commanded, and the display reorganized to highlight key decision-makers across different species. Their reactions had been carefully shaped through years of subtle information warfare, preparing them for this moment without their knowledge. Ambassador Chen's voice came through the quantum comm. "Doctor, are you seeing this? The Centaurians have already proposed a new framework for technological sharing among former client races." "Right on schedule," Maya confirmed, checking the timestamp against their predictions. "The seeds we planted in their research databases are bearing fruit. They think they're acting independently, but they're following paths we laid out years ago." The true genius of humanity's plan hadn't been in their military technology or stealth capabilities. It had been in understanding that real power came from shaping how people think and react. While the hegemony had ruled through force and intimidation, humanity had learned to guide civilization itself. "New development," the AI announced. "Detecting increased quantum communications between former client races. Pattern matches predicted scenario Delta 7. Maya nodded, unsurprised. "They're forming their own alliances, just as we expected." The hegemony's strictly hierarchical structure is being replaced by a more organic network of relationships. The display updated again, showing the rapid evolution of power dynamics across the galaxy. The hegemony's former client races weren't simply declaring independence. They were forming new connections, sharing technology and resources in ways that the hegemony had always forbidden. "Doctor," her assistant interrupted, "the Archians are requesting access to the diplomatic archives. They want to verify the historical records of their early interactions with the hegemony." This was the most delicate part of the operation. Humanity hadn't just prepared for military victory. They had gathered extensive evidence of the hegemony's manipulation of historical records. The truth about how they had suppressed other civilizations' development would soon be impossible to hide. "Grant them access," Maya authorized, "but maintain the information flow controls. Too much truth too quickly could destabilize the transition." The quantum networks hummed as carefully selected historical data began flowing to the Arxian scholars. The hegemony had maintained power not just through military might, but through controlling the narrative of galactic history. Now that control was slipping away, but in a managed fashion that wouldn't lead to chaos. "Ambassador Chen is requesting a status update," the AI reported. "The Hegemony Council is showing signs of internal division." Maya pulled up the relevant data streams. The council members were reacting exactly as their psychological profiles had predicted. Some were adapting to the new reality, while others clung desperately to their old power structure. "Send her the latest model projections," Maya instructed, "and highlight the intervention points where diplomatic pressure can help guide their transition." A new alert flashed across the display. The quantum sensors had detected a surge of activity in the hegemony's central data archives. Their leaders were attempting to purge certain historical records, trying to hide the extent of their past manipulations. Maya allowed herself a small laugh. "Too late for that," she murmured, watching as backup copies of those same records began appearing on secure networks throughout former client space. "The truth has already been set free." Admiral Chen's voice joined the conversation. "Doctor, the military situation remains stable, but we're detecting increased activity among some of the more militant hegemony factions. Should we be concerned?" Maya studied the probability curves flowing across her displays. "No need for military intervention, Admiral. Their own people will handle this for us. Watch." As if on cue, the displays showed a wave of communications from junior officers in the hegemony fleet. They had seen enough to understand that the old way of doing things was over. The rigid military hierarchy was dissolving from within, as younger leaders chose adaptation over blind loyalty. "Fascinating," Ambassador Chen commented, watching the same data. They're not just accepting change, they're embracing it, almost as if they've been waiting for an opportunity. Maya finished. The hegemony's suppression of advancement didn't just hurt their client races. It stifled their own people's potential as well. We just had to show them another way was possible. The quantum computers hummed, processing petabytes of data as they continued tracking and guiding the galaxy's transformation. Humanity's victory hadn't come from superior firepower or clever tactics. It had come from understanding the fundamental patterns of civilization itself. New probability matrices forming, the AI announced. Detecting emergence of novel social structures across multiple species groups. Maya watched as the future took shape in the quantum probability clouds. The galaxy was reorganizing itself, finding new ways to cooperate and grow. The hegemony's fall wouldn't lead to chaos or war. It would lead to something entirely new. "Send word to all our teams," she instructed. "Operation Checkmate is proceeding as planned. The galaxy is learning to evolve again." The displays showed thousands of points of light, not warships this time, but centers of cultural and technological exchange sprouting up across former hegemony space. Humanity hadn't just changed the balance of power, they had changed how power itself worked in the galaxy. And they had done it not through destruction, but through understanding. Not through conquest, but through carefully guided revelation. The price of victory. First Delegate Kixar of the former hegemony watched the Earth delegation enter the new galactic assembly chamber, his crystalline skin reflecting the ambient light in patterns that expressed deep uncertainty. The chamber itself symbolized the changes sweeping through known space. Gone were the towering platforms that had once elevated hegemony representatives above others. Now all species met on equal ground. Ambassador Sarah Chen led the human delegation, her bearing confident but not arrogant. Behind her walked her brother, Admiral James Chen, and Dr. Maya Patil. The three architects of humanity's bloodless revolution were here to witness the formal dissolution of the old order. "Welcome, representatives of Earth," Kixar greeted them, using his own voice rather than the traditional translator. It was a small gesture, but significant. Learning other species' languages had been discouraged under the old regime. "The Transition Council is ready to begin." Sarah nodded, taking her place at the circular table. Representatives from 23 species sat together, former oppressors and subjugated races now facing each other as equals. The tension in the room was palpable, centuries of resentment and fear not easily forgotten. "Before we begin," a Centaurian delegate spoke up, their bioluminescent patterns showing agitation. "We must address the question that many are asking. How can we trust that humanity won't simply become the new hegemony?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Sarah looked around the table, meeting each delegate's gaze before responding. "Because we understand something the hegemony never did," she said quietly. "True power doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from helping them grow." She gestured, and Dr. Patil activated a holographic display in the center of the table. It showed the exponential increase in technological and cultural exchange that had occurred since the hegemony's power was broken. "In just 3 months, we've seen more scientific advancement than in the previous decade," Maya explained. "When species are free to collaborate and innovate, everyone benefits. Our role isn't to rule, it's to help facilitate this natural growth." Admiral Chen added, "Our fleet remains on standby, but only to prevent any attempt to resurrect the old power structure. We're already seeing joint research projects between former rival species, developing defense technology that surpasses anything Earth or the hegemony ever created." Kixar's crystalline form shifted, expressing a complex emotion that the humans' cultural databases were still learning to interpret. "Yet some would say you achieved all this through deception, through infiltrating our systems and manipulating our society." "Yes," Sarah acknowledged without hesitation. "We did, because the alternative was either submission to the hegemony or a devastating war that would have cost billions of lives." We chose a third path. A Proxian delegate, their multiple eyes blinking in sequence, spoke next. What you did, it was more than military strategy. You changed how we think, how we see ourselves and each other. Some would call that a form of violence. It was, Maya admitted. We influenced the course of civilizations without their knowledge or consent. We guided the development of ideas and relationships across dozens of species. The ethical implications will be debated for generations. The chamber fell silent as the weight of this acknowledgement settled over the assembly. The humans weren't trying to claim moral superiority. They were admitting that their victory had come with its own ethical costs. But consider the alternative, James added softly. The hegemony maintained power through force and fear, suppressing advancement to maintain control. We used understanding and subtle guidance to create opportunities for growth. Judge us by the results. The holographic display shifted, showing the rapid changes occurring throughout known space. New trade routes were forming, cultural exchanges were flourishing, and technological innovation was accelerating. Species that had been deliberately kept apart by the hegemony were discovering remarkable synergies in their approaches to science and culture. We're here today not to establish a new power structure, Sarah continued, but to ensure nothing like the hegemony can ever arise again. The treaties we're proposing will guarantee free exchange of knowledge, prevent technological suppression, and establish protocols for helping emerging civilizations develop naturally. An Archean representative, their scales showing patterns of deep thought, raised a question. And what of justice? Many among the former client races call for punishment of those who enforced hegemony rule. Vengeance would only perpetuate the cycle, Sarah replied. Instead, we propose a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Let the full history be known, let the wounds be acknowledged, but let us focus on building something better rather than settling old scores. Kixar's crystalline form pulsed with an emotion that translated as painful acceptance. We who once ruled must now learn to live as equals. It is not an easy transition. No profound change ever is, Maya said gently. But look at what's already happening. Your younger generation is forming connections and pursuing innovations that would have been unthinkable under the old system. They're discovering who they can be without the burden of maintaining artificial superiority. The display updated again, showing the latest data from Project Oracle's predictive models. The probability of successful transition to a stable, cooperative galactic society was now above 85% and still climbing. We're not here to rule, Sarah summarized, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. We're here to help build something that's never existed before. A galaxy where advancement comes through cooperation rather than competition, where diversity of thought and approach is celebrated rather than suppressed. She stood, looking around at the assembled representatives. The choice before us now is not between human dominance and hegemony rule. It's between clinging to the patterns of the past and embracing the uncertainty and the potential of true change. One by one, the delegates began to signal their agreement, not with enthusiastic celebration, but with the solemn understanding that they were committing to a fundamental transformation of galactic society. The price of victory, they were all learning, wasn't measured in ships destroyed or territories conquered. It was measured in the challenge of overcoming centuries of ingrained beliefs and behaviors, in the difficult work of learning to trust, to cooperate, to grow together rather than in opposition to each other. As the session continued, Sarah caught her brother's eye across the table. They had achieved something unprecedented, a revolution without destruction, a transformation through understanding rather than force. But their work was far from over. The real challenge was just beginning. Dawn of a new era. 5 years after the fall of the hegemony, the observation deck of the Galactic Exchange Center offered a view that would have been impossible under the old regime. Ships of every known species moved freely through the space lanes, their designs showing a remarkable fusion of technologies and aesthetics that had once been strictly segregated. Dr. Maya Patel stood at the viewport, accompanied by Ambassador Sarah Chen and Admiral James Chen. watching a Proxian-Arctian joint research vessel dock with the station. Its crystalline organic hybrid hull represented exactly the kind of innovation they had hoped to unleash. The latest data from Project Oracle is fascinating, Maya said, bringing up a holographic display. We're seeing cultural and technological development patterns that even our most optimistic models didn't predict. Sarah studied the flowing streams of information. Because they're not just combining their knowledge, they're creating entirely new ways of thinking. The Centaurians' approach to quantum mechanics combined with Proxian biological computing, it's revolutionary. And completely beyond our control, James added with a slight smile. Which is exactly as it should be. The three humans who had orchestrated the greatest transformation in galactic history now found themselves in an unexpected position. They had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes, but success had brought its own challenges and revelations. A soft chime announced the arrival of first speaker Kixar, the former hegemony delegate who now served as one of the coordinators of the Galactic Exchange. His crystalline form had adopted new patterns that the old regime would have considered scandalously expressive. "Enjoying the view?" he asked, joining them at the viewport. The latest cultural exchange festival is about to begin. 17 species participating, sharing art forms that the hegemony once classified as potentially destabilizing influences. How times change, Sarah mused. 5 years ago, the idea of unrestricted cultural exchange would have been unthinkable. Now it's becoming the norm. The station's central atrium below them was filling with beings of all species, gathering for the festival. What had once been carefully controlled diplomatic interactions were now genuine celebrations of diversity and creativity. Not everyone is happy with the changes, Kixar noted. There are still those who dream of returning to the old ways, who find this much freedom uncomfortable. We know, James confirmed. Our intelligence networks track at least 3 groups actively working to restore something like the hegemony system, but they're finding surprisingly little support. Maya brought up new data on her display, because the benefits of cooperation have become too obvious to ignore. Look at these advancement curves: medical technology, energy efficiency, faster than light travel. Every field is seeing unprecedented progress. The display shifted to show the latest breakthrough, a new form of quantum communication developed through collaboration between 6 different species. It made the technology humanity had used to coordinate their revolution look primitive by comparison. "We've become students again," Sarah said with evident satisfaction. Earth's scientists are struggling to keep up with some of these developments, exactly as it should be. Kixar's crystalline form shifted, and what they had learned was amusement. "You humans are peculiar. You worked so hard to prove your superiority, only to seem happiest when others surpass you. Because we understood something fundamental," Maya explained. "True advancement doesn't come from hoarding knowledge or maintaining artificial hierarchies. It comes from the chaos and creativity of unrestricted exchange." Below them, the festival was beginning. Holographic art from a dozen worlds merged and danced through the atrium. Music that would have once been classified as culturally disruptive filled the space. Species that had been separated by hegemony decree found their art forms speaking to each other in unexpected ways. "There are challenges ahead," James acknowledged. "The outer regions are still unstable. Some former client races are struggling with their new independence, and we're detecting signs of previously unknown civilizations at the galaxy's edge." Sarah nodded. "The real test will be how we collectively handle first contact with truly new species, whether we can avoid the mistakes of the past." Speaking of which, Kixar interjected, "The Exchange Council has been discussing the formation of a first contact advisory board. We'd like Earth to participate, but not lead." The humans exchanged knowing looks. This was exactly the kind of development they had hoped for. Not humans imposing their will, but all species working together to build better approaches. "We'd be honored to contribute," Sarah replied. "As equals." The festival below reached a crescendo as artists from former enemy species created something new together. The music and lights spoke of loss and hope, of endings and beginnings, of the complex journey from opposition to cooperation. Project Oracle's latest predictions show something interesting. Maya said, pulling up one final display. The probability curves for galactic development have become essentially impossible to calculate beyond the next few years. Because there are too many variables, James asked. Because there are too many possibilities, Maya corrected. Too much genuine creativity and innovation. We can't predict it because it's truly new, exactly as a healthy civilization should be. The humans fell silent, watching the celebration below. They had succeeded in their mission to break the hegemony's power, but they had achieved something far more significant. They had helped create conditions for genuine growth and change. Sarah touched the window lightly. 5 years ago, we proved humanity could outthink and outmaneuver the greatest power in known space. But our real victory wasn't in showing our strength. It was in showing a better way, James finished. No, Kixar corrected, his crystalline form glowing with complex emotions. Your victory was in helping us all find a better way together. The festival lights played across the observation deck, casting ever-changing patterns that seemed to echo the transformation of galactic society itself. Humanity had changed the galaxy not through force of arms or technological superiority, but through understanding the fundamental patterns of civilization and creating conditions for natural growth. As new ships arrived at the station, research vessels, cultural exchanges, trading crafts, and diplomatic missions, they proved that the age of imposed order was over. In its place was something chaotic, creative, and alive with possibility. The true dawn of galactic civilization had begun.